Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest joint BSI IFE webinar. Today we're looking at competence for the fire safety professional. I'm Claire Price, I'm sector lead in the built environment team here at BSI. I've been project lead for our recently completed work programme for the built environment competence standards that was driven by DLUC and that was supporting the Building Safety Act. It ran for 2 years. The programme produced 4 new standards, an overarching framework of competence, and 3 PAS documents for the duty holder roles of principal designer and principal contractor, and a standard for managing safety in residential buildings as well. Another part of that work programme was to establish a new BSI technical committee, CPB1 for competence in the built environment. So there's been a lot of work in this area, but still a lot of work going on in industry as sectors continue to develop their own competence requirements. And that's really what we're going to hear more about today, what's happening in the fire industry. So can we move on to the next slide, and I'll just cover off a little bit about the housekeeping. It is a listen-only webinar that we're running today, and it will be recorded, so I hope that that's okay. You're agreeing to that. We welcome any questions at all via the Q&A function. Just submit them and we will pick those up at the end of the event. We will hold that short Q&A session at the conclusion. So do post your questions. That would be really great. We are, looking forward to quite an active discussion at the end. If you experience any technical difficulties, submit the issue in the same way through the Q&A function as well. There will be a feedback survey, and we'll also send a link with a recording of the webinar in due course. To all those who registered and participated, but all of our links to our on-demand webinars are available on the BSI website as well. So it is a CPD recognised webinar, so please request your certificate or the feedback survey afterwards as well. So that's the housekeeping. So let me introduce our speaker today. Dr. Peter Wilkinson, I'm very pleased to be joined by him, who will be effectively leading the webinar today. He leads the IFE in technical matters in a relatively new role, designed to provide better technical support to members of IFE. He represents the organisation on national and international professional forums and contributes to post-Grenfell initiatives in the UK and worldwide, drives the development and remit of the Technical Strategy Advisory Group, TSAG. He leads on the continuous development of the IFE's body of knowledge, manages their responses to consultations, and acts as the main point of contact for technical inquiries, helping members to understand the institution's policy positions in a range of technical areas. He holds an engineering doctorate where he investigated resilient fire engineering building design. Peter also chairs the BSI Technical Committee, FSH 24, which develops and codifies fire safety engineering practices. And I know Peter through our membership of the Competence Steering Group that's been working to look at these sector requirements for competence frameworks for quite some time now. So let me hand over now to Peter, and I'll see you at the end for our Q&A session. Thanks, over to you now, Peter.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And thank you for that welcome, and many thanks to all of you for attending this event, which is the second date where we've run these monthly CPD webinars with BSI. Today we're going to explore the thorny subject of competence for the fire safety professional. You're probably going to ask why we're going to do that. Everybody's talking about competence these days. We don't need any more on that subject, do we? Well, I think we probably do. The tragic events that occurred in West London in June 2017 and the subsequent public inquiry have revealed the shocking truth about competence, or rather the lack of it, right across the construction sector. And what's worse, it reveals how we became accepting of that state of affairs. I know I've been accused of navel-gazing when I've spoken to some people about the revelations of the public inquiry, but I think the fact of the matter is I kept on being shocked by what was being disclosed. And in the wise words of an industry colleague that I read on an authoritative social media platform a while back, as an industry, we've let down the public, and the least we can do is make the effort to learn from what we've been hearing. And I think that's a sensible sentiment. We've got a lot to learn from what we've been hearing. And I'd also like to take us back in time a bit and learn or relearn from some of the stalwarts of our sector. So I'm going to be a bit selfish, and as someone who is really interested in our profession and how it started, and how our institution has developed, I'd like to take a look back at discussions that we've had about competence in the past. I think it's useful to do that. I think it's useful to revisit some of those key light bulb moments, because I've noticed a lot of wheel reinvention going on over the last few years. And I genuinely think that we're finally getting to a point where the ideas or the ideals from the past are actually coming to fruition. So whilst the title of today's presentation is Competence for the Fire Safety Professional, I've included a little subtitle, which is Laws, Principles and Charters. And this is what we're going to cover. In no particular order, we'll take a look at what competence means for the fire safety professional and the wider built environment. We'll look at how that competence can be demonstrated to others in order to restore public confidence in what we do. And also I want to look at the forthcoming contextualised registration process that's coming from the Engineering Council. And that will apply to all professional engineers who wish to work on projects involving in-scope buildings under the imminent building safety regime for England. So let's see how we get on this updated and expanded presentation. And I'd like to begin with what I consider to be the first law of fire engineering, and clearly that's Margaret Law. Sadly, 2017 will be remembered for a number of reasons within the fire engineering community. Apart from the obvious, it was during that year that the IFE lost some influential members, including 3 pioneers of our profession. That included Professor Ramachandran, known as Ram, the pioneer of fire protection economics and probabilistic fire risk analysis. Also, Professor Makveladze passed away in 2017, one of the first professors of fire engineering in the UK. He was appointed chair of fire engineering at University of Central Lancashire in 1993, a seat partly sponsored by the IFE. Now, Professor Margaret Law died in August of 2017. She began her career as a scientist at the Fire Research Station, carrying out research into many aspects of fire behaviour and its effects on building materials and structures. She also became involved in the application of these research results in building regulations, codes of practice, and design guides. The application of research to solve practical problems was of particular interest to her, and so she joined ARUP to act as an advisor on fire engineering for projects being designed within the firm. She went on to create innovative fire safety solutions on major projects such as the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Lloyd's Building and Stansted Airport in the UK. Margaret's scientific work and her fire engineering work was and continues to be influential. She believed profoundly in what she termed measurement, and this belief drove her work which was always founded on quantified scientific criteria and always rigorously derived. And it was an honour for me to meet her and interview her as part of my own research. So I'd like to spend just a bit of time reflecting on Margaret's thoughts when she answered a question, the question, what is a fire engineer, in her 1990 conference paper, because her answer is interesting. She boils it down to 6 characteristics. And she says, prerequisites. Whatever their speciality, engineers have certain assumptions and background knowledge in common. They can discuss concepts across the frontiers of their speciality. The concept of flow, for example, whether it's water down a pipe, people down a corridor, electrical charges, and so on, these can be discussed directly or by analogy with ease. The physical and mechanical behaviour of materials and structures can be understood and discussed in a broad way. Engineers and architects too, by their education and training, have these concepts built into them and discuss matters accordingly. So here, Margaret is describing fundamental engineering education. The next characteristic she discusses is knowledge of measurement and quantification. Measurement and quantification are fundamental to any proper engineering design, she said. It is sad that so many people are reluctant to measure things. Presumably, this might cast doubts on what they know to be right. Because fire danger and the effects of fire can generate deep emotions, the proposal to reduce such matters to cold numbers seems to be callous and not a proper response to the imponderable forces of nature. Yet decisions have to be made. And she goes on. So my second point, therefore, is that a fire engineer must understand how to measure and quantify fire phenomena and fire safety. So really, I think Margaret is emphasising that fire safety professionals must be able to apply those prerequisite engineering principles to the fire phenomena, and that quantification is an important way of making comparisons or making decisions. The third characteristic she cites is awareness. Fire engineering is an important component of most activities, and no one person could hope to be an expert across the board. Nevertheless, the fire engineer should have an awareness of the various aspects, an ability to identify potential problem areas, and know where to go to find an answer. So I think what she's saying there is pretty self-explanatory. Fire engineering is a broad subject area, fire safety even broader, and as fire safety professionals, we must be aware of as much of it as we can, but be accepting that we're not expert in it all. We must know and remember our limits. The fourth characteristic is experience. She says, awareness is part of experience. Experience, as well as academic training, is recognised as an essential part of engineering training, and it is just as important for fire engineers. Experience of what will happen, not what ought to happen, what is practical in the circumstances, what is trivial, what is significant, what contributes to safety, and what is value for money, and what must be done to meet the rules. So she was saying there, the fire engineer should have the opportunity to gain practical experience. I think we can all recognise that. The fifth criteria she mentioned is research and development. And she says, over the career of a fire engineer, there will be many changes in technology, lifestyle, and knowledge, which need to be recognised and understood. For many aspects of fire safety, there is not yet the basis of an engineering design approach or enough accumulated practice on which a code of practice can be based. Therefore, it is particularly important that the fire engineer keeps ahead of the latest research and developments. So here you can tell that she was speaking in 1990, in a time before BS 7974 with DD 240 as its predecessor, or BS 9999 were published. A time when research was directly applied to fire safety engineering. But I think what she said still holds true today. Whilst we have codes now, we still need to know and be aware of new knowledge and new developments. Learning never finishes. The final aspect she talks about, the characteristic, is toughness. And she says, finally, the fire engineer needs a certain toughness. And I'm referring to intellectual toughness. By this, I mean that the engineer must be able to be tested and challenged and deal with matters in a rigorous and analytical and, above all, in an honest way. He must be aware of the rules, but not use them as a shield. These are really important words she's using. The fire engineer must be strong enough to admit honestly what is not known, as well as insisting on what we do know is taken into account. All information is an aid to a judgment. The fire engineer must be tough enough to stand up to a good deal of questioning and in turn be able to push other people in the same way. Justify what you are saying if you want to be taken seriously. Brilliant. So with this lecture, Margaret has spelled out what she sees as being key important attributes of a fire safety professional. And I think nowadays we can recognise these as competence, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. She set it out quite clearly there. She then finishes off with asking, what makes this list different from any other aspect of engineering? And she answers her question by saying nothing. Only that with fire safety engineering, we have to spell it out. It is not yet taken for granted. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Margaret. Those words from several decades ago, just as relevant today, I would argue. Let's move on to some principles of fire engineering. Now, when I talk about principles, I like to highlight the principles that were set out in the work of Mostyn Bullock, Neil Butterworth and Adam Monaghan back in 2014 when they developed a series of articles which were published in our IFP journal. This is the series of 4. There was the development of competency in fire engineering, code compliance or fire engineering for life safety design, have we moved on, shouldering the responsibility, and then finally, have you got time? So I've written down the issue numbers and the dates, and I'd seriously recommend that we revisit these articles, make a note of them, and you'll find them on the My IFE section of our website. If you read them, record the time you've spent on your CPD log. It'll be an invaluable experience. But this series of articles was born out of the work of the IFE's Special Interest Group on Competency and Ethics. They also introduced the concept of total fire engineering, which has unapologetic nods to the term coined by Sir Ove Arup, who was motivated by the idea of total architecture, where all relevant design decisions are considered together. Now, I'd like to focus for a short while today on the first of these papers, the development of competency in fire engineering, because in it, Mostyn and Adam describe how and when IFE gained its Engineering Council licence and began registration activities in 1997. This is the Engineering Council's mission statement, to maintain internationally recognised standards of competence and commitment to the engineering profession and to license competent institutions to champion standards. Its reference to competence is no accident. The paper continues. The timing was right. Design and construction in the built environment was in a period of significant change and relative well-being. Many large-scale projects were underway or in the pipeline where design requirements demanded significant freedoms from the hitherto closely prescriptive approaches. Fire engineering profession flourished and prospered in this environment. The time when fire engineering was principally the reserve of academics, scientists, and insurance surveyors had passed. The rigorous processes carried out by professional engineering institutions are designed to deliver the demanded standard of competency. registered fire engineers are bound to work under a code of conduct of both the IFE and, as a condition of membership, the Engineering Council as a condition of registration. Continuing professional development is also a mandatory requirement, and who can argue with the sense of that? It would therefore seem obvious to expect that practicing fire engineers are competent. Well, wouldn't it? The paper continues. The profession can do all it can to produce fire engineers of the highest calibre, but the domain in which these engineers operate presents serious challenges to competent and ethical practice that cannot be ignored. This domain isn't just the technical nuts and bolts of fire engineering, i.e. using up-to-date research, employing the right standards, analysis methods, science and computational techniques. Rather, it is those aspects of professional conduct which relate more to ethical practice in fire engineering project management. It's also crucial to recognise that the thing that sets fire engineering apart from the majority of other engineering disciplines in the built environment is that fire is an accidental loading condition, i.e. there is a significant probabilistic aspect to its application. Whereas other areas of design, such as structural, acoustic and thermal performance, are all normal day-to-day service conditions. Failure to design and construct a building properly in terms of normal service conditions tend to lead to situations where resulting problems manifest themselves pretty quickly in terms of customer dissatisfaction. This is in marked contrast to defects in relation to fire safety that may not become apparent until there is a significant fire, in itself a probabilistic event. We have to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that this can lead to an apathetic approach to fire safety, or the perceived need to engage a competent fire safety professional being given second billing in comparison to more pressing concerns. So I think you agree it's gripping stuff and very relevant to the pre-Grenfell environment. Neil presented a summary of his work in our 2015 conference. He said, the importance of competency and ethics in the field of fire engineering cannot be underestimated. He pulled out 5 key strands from that total fire engineering concept that need to be underpinned with competency and ethics. Fire design. To ensure competency, you need to identify all the fire safety goals, not just the life safety ones, engaging with all stakeholders, identifying project constraints and developing a fire safety solution to meet all of them. Execution. None of that fire design is any good unless you execute it competently and correctly through specification, construction, handover and maintenance. Integration. You need to be competent across a wide range of professionals. Architecture, fire and rescue service, building control, mechanical engineers, structural engineers. Team. That competency has to run through the whole team so that you're working with a group that is proficient across chemistry, structural engineering, smoke dynamics, fluid flow, people behaviour, all the specialisms within the specialism of fire engineering. Excellence. As the underlying principle, excellence can run through the whole fire engineering project if you have competency in all those above areas. Wow, it takes a lot, doesn't it? And in his presentation, Neil went on to talk about the Engineering Council's UK spec objective known as E5. It's about ethics. The statement of ethical principles sets a standard to which members of the engineering profession should aspire in their working habits and relationships. The values on which it is based should apply in every situation in which professional engineers and technicians exercise their judgment. And Neil highlighted fundamental principles running through the 4 pillars of this statement. And these are the 4 pillars: accuracy and rigour. Professional engineers and technicians have a duty to ensure they acquire and use wisely and faithfully the knowledge that is relevant to the engineering skills needed in their work. Honesty and integrity. Professional engineers and technicians should adopt the highest standards of professional conduct, openness, fairness and honesty. Avoid deception, show reliability, be trustworthy, declare conflicts, reject bribery, and above all, have respect. 3, respect for life, law and the public good. Professional engineers and technicians should give due weight to all relevant laws, facts and published guidance and the wider public interest. This includes natural and human resources, health and safety, effect on the natural environment, lawful and justified, and the effect on society should be considered at all times. Responsible leadership. Listening and informing professional engineers and technicians should aspire to high standards of leadership in the exploitation of management of technology. They hold a privileged and trusted position in society and are expected to demonstrate that they are seeking to serve wider society and be sensitive to public concerns. Be objective, truthful, see concerns of others, and have public awareness to form the basis of responsible leadership. So what Neil was doing, to my mind, was setting out that ethical behaviour is an integral part of competence and essential in achieving competent fire engineering or fire safety. And I'm pleased to say that these critically important foundations that the Competency and Ethics Special Interest Group built led to strengthening the Code of Conduct within the IFE for members and registrants. It led to the development of the IFE's whistleblowing policy and guidance and established the IFE's Ethics Committee. Neil went on to say, once we've got our own house in order, then we can go about spreading the word and articulating the value of competency and ethics. We should raise our profile of the IFE as custodians across the wider industry. Beyond that, we can provide guidance on what stakeholders can expect from a competent fire engineer and thus encourage them to seek one out on all relevant projects. So if we go through that loop, we have people demanding fire engineers, validated by the IFE, and get back to achieving our original goal of providing member benefits. Admirable objectives, Neil. The issue that happened there is a couple of years later we had an incredibly serious fire, and well, it's not, I think we need to turn this into positive, which has certainly accelerated this good work. And I'm also pleased that, building on the Statement of Ethical Principles that was established in 2019 by the Engineering Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering, the group published its report this February called Engineering Ethics, Maintaining Society's Trust in the Engineering Profession. And that builds on those principles and proposes actions and appropriate regulation that would achieve a more ethical culture in the UK's engineering profession. At its heart is the need to ensure that the public has confidence that the profession acts ethically. The report reminds us that inevitably there are tensions between profitability, sustainability and safety, and that engineers seek to be aware of and the need to balance these different tensions. We know that professional engineers and technicians endeavour to get things right. However, there have been some important questions posed in recent years, and social media has amplified the public scrutiny. And this report from February this year cites Dame Judith Hackett's review of the building regulations and fire safety that followed the Grenfell Tower tragedy, when she highlighted that there was cultural issues across the construction sector, which can be described as a race to the bottom, caused either through ignorance, indifference, or because the system does not facilitate good practice. The report makes some challenging recommendations across these 5 themes of education and training, professionalism, engagement and communications, governance and measurement, leadership and accountability. The Royal Academy of Engineering the Engineering Council and professional engineering institutions such as the IFE will be progressing this vision in short, medium and long-term actions, working together with employers to consider what they should be doing to embed ethical thinking more strongly in all that we do. Now, I'd like to introduce my second law of fire engineering, and that's Angus Law, obviously. Dr. Angus Law is a senior lecturer in fire safety engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and he's previously held positions as a lecturer at the University of Queensland in Australia and has practical experience as an engineer, fire engineer at Harrop. He was asked to chair a meeting on competency in June 2018 by the Industry Response Group Competence Steering Group. The goal of the meeting was to ensure that all those individuals engaged at every stage of the life cycle of higher risk buildings and responsible for carrying out work that impacts safety have the proven competence to do so. Actually, the meeting was really to describe and agree accepted shared principles for competence. Angus stated that he had attended similar meetings and workshops previously, which typically developed into talk and debate at cross purposes with little or no outcome or progress. Therefore, his intent was to define a framework and a language which could be used to frame the problem, provide a basis of commonality and a common understanding, and ultimately lead to a successful outcome. So what did he talk about? Well, Angus stated that there is an important distinction between competence and accreditation. In his experience, the two are often confused and the concepts can be used or are used interchangeably, which in turn leads to talk at crossed purposes. He proposed that competence is the attributes and behaviours, and accreditation is the badge that's given to someone who is ostensibly competent. Angus pointed out that accreditation does not equal competence. He also reminded everyone that Dame Judith Hackett distinguishes between the two, stating there is a lack of competence, skills, knowledge and experience, and a lack of accreditation, a formal process of assurance. Now, I love a good quotation, and Angus quoted Confucius when talking about competence versus confidence. Confucius said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And he also cited work by Kruger and Dunning from 1999. Are you confident because you have knowledge, or are you confident because you have no knowledge? The purpose of this aside was to make the point that one of the most important aspects of competence is the assessment of self-competence, but also that is inherently difficult. The difficulty of doing this is because the lack of competence can give the illusion of competence, and often those with the least competence consider themselves most competent. Angus went on to introduce types of competency. He introduced the concept of specific competence. So particular professions will have specific competencies that only that profession can have, and only that profession can assess, e.g. specific fire engineering skills. Then there are common competencies that are common across professionals, such as professional ethics, for example. And then there are interdependencies, so competencies that are required of one profession by another profession. A professional institution, by definition, should have a monopoly on a given activity. For example, a fire engineer can only really be assessed by another fire engineer. Angus also introduced the Engineering Council Statement of Ethical Principles as a high-level set of general attributes that should be expected of professionals and people within the industry. And this, he said this in 2018, and let's remind ourselves that Neil Butterworth was telling us this in 2015. And this work was summarised in a report that was submitted to Dame Judith's review. And helpfully, it defined competence and competencies. Competence, the combination of skills and knowledge that enables a person to make informed decisions and carry out a task. And competencies, particular skills and knowledge of an individual that may be applied personally or collectively as part of a team. These principles that Angus outlined were really the kickstart for work which led to BSI Flex 8670. So, principle 1, the core set of principles. The core set of competence, sorry. The assessment of competence requires a defined core set of competencies that are capable of being evaluated in a consistent, objective manner. The adequacy of the competencies should be judged by other recognised members of the same group with input of other relevant stakeholders as necessary. The second principle, though, is about expectation. So in order to perform the role effectively, each member of the team is entitled to expect specific competencies from the other members. And the third principle is about assessment. Recognition of competence follows assessment by a professional regulated body. The process by which an individual or an organisation is assessed and recognised should be relevant to the role they're undertaking and provide consistent, objective evaluation. I mentioned Flex 8670, and that's core criteria for building safety in competence frameworks. It's a code of practice. It was published on the 30th of April 2021, and it was created in response to findings from Dame Judith Hackett's review, which highlighted a fragmented approach to and a lack of consistency in the processes and the standards for assuring the competence of those working on buildings as a major flaw in the current regulatory system. So accordingly, BS Flex 8670 provides a set of core principles of competence, including leading and managing safety, communicating safety, delivering safety, risk management, regulations and processes, building systems, ethics, and fire and life safety. It's become a bit of a benchmark standard that we're using in a lot of our competency development work. But what's the common theme with Margaret Law and her discussion back in 1990? The principles outlined so well by Mostyn, Adam and Neil in the early 2010s, the work of Angus Law and the Academy of Engineering, and this Flex 8670? Well, I see it as this. Amongst other things, being competent is a combination of acquiring knowledge and practicing experience and living by appropriate behaviours. And I think as an institution and as a profession, we've known this for some time now. We can track this theme back 3 decades. For me, the important element in all this is that behavioural aspect. I think it's about taking personal responsibility. Competence isn't something that you can expect your professional body to do to you. You have to live it, you have to show it. And importantly, if you're acting as a professional, a fire safety professional, you really have to be able to demonstrate it. I'll just say that again. I think it's about personal responsibility, and I think you have to live it, show it, and to act as a professional or a fire safety professional, you have to be able to demonstrate it. Now, I would say this, wouldn't I? The IFE has all the tools to help. We've got member grades, we've got fire risk assessor registration, and we've got engineering council registration to allow practicing fire safety professionals demonstrate to colleagues, the wider construction industry, and to the public at large that their competence has been assessed by peers in a third-party verified way. And I've got a bit to go yet, but this is the call to action in the middle. I really urge you, review your own membership and registration status. Is it still at the level at which you're currently operating, or should you be aiming higher? We've experienced a steady growth in engineering council registration applications over the last couple of years, as well as the fire risk assessor register, which has moved to become third-party verified with EngTech registration. The behavioural piece is up to you. Remember what Confucius said. Right, just take a swig. Let's also consider the additional work that the Engineering Council is engaged with. Now, this is one of the direct recommendations from Dame Judith Hackett, who was supported in her work by an industry response group, which established a competence steering group to develop the role and remit for an overarching competence body, ensure a coherent and consistent approach to raising and overseeing competence standards within each discipline in scope, and support the delivery of competent people working on higher risk buildings. You will no doubt be aware that the Competence Steering Group brought together a wide coalition of bodies from across the building sector, wider than ever before, and that enabled it to form a comprehensive view and significant buy-in to the recommendations in its final report, setting the bar in October 2020. The Engineering Council was asked to chair a working group to make proposals for improving the competence of professional engineers in this sector, and that was referred to as Working Group 1. 13 professional engineering institutions nominated representatives to this group, as well as other stakeholders. Now, in terms of assessment and reassessment of competence, Working Group 1 recommended that a contextualised standard and a register for engineering professionals should be established. UK Spec HRB has evolved from an initial draft that was developed by Working Group 1, published in the first CSG report, Raising the Bar, in September 2019. The Engineering Council's Contextualised Registration Steering Group was established in November 2020 to further develop the Working Group 1 draft, refining it, ensuring that it was compatible with both the new UK Spec 4 and incorporated all those elements of Flex 8670 that we discussed earlier. Now, Working Group 3 was asked to look at competence of fire engineers, and Working Group 3 has really worked closely with Working Group 1. And fire engineering is actually part of the overall engineering competence framework under this Engineering Council oversight. And what has the group done? Well, the steering group initially completed an in-depth mapping exercise. It produced robust cross-checking document to ensure that all those aspects from Flex 8670 version 3 are covered within the framework and that they align with UK Spec version 4. Several drafts of this new proprietary standard, UK Spec HRB, have been produced, refined and agreed. 3 discipline annex working groups were established and have met to develop discipline annexes in fire, structures and building services engineering disciplines. Most recently, the steering group has been considering the licensing process, registration requirements, revalidation and governance. And now the Engineering Council is in full swing, liaising with professional engineering institutes to discuss implementation. This development has been specifically designed for UK engineering profession to assess the competence and commitment of individual engineers and technicians for working in or on higher risk buildings. UK Spec HRB incorporates the criteria from Flex 8670 and sets out a sector-specific competence framework consisting of a core and discipline annexes. For most engineers and technicians, demonstrating competence could involve registration against the core framework only, or include one or a combination of the discipline annexes. Like I said, fire engineering, structural engineering, building services engineering. And the intention is to ensure that everybody doing design work or building work is competent to do their work in a way that ensures compliance with the building regulations. Now, personally, I think that one of the most important features of this contextualized registration is the concept of revalidation. Revalidation was set out in the Building a Safer Future report, and it said to ensure greater robustness in levels of competence, competence levels should be reassessed and reaccredited on a defined periodic basis. That recommendation was later reinforced in the Setting the Bar report. The engineering register should incorporate the contextualised standards requiring assessment and revalidation based on the identified levels of higher risk buildings. Revalidation is also recommended as a core requirement for the building safety competence in Flex 8670. And this is why registrants must revalidate their UK Spec HRB registration every 5 years to maintain registration in a HRB section of the register. So I appreciate we've covered an awful lot here. We've looked back at some of the discussions, the developments and the strides that our profession was taking historically. And we've looked at the developments that were prompted by the post-Grenfell initiatives, but really accelerated our thoughts to respond to the dreadful state of affairs that we have found. Now then, in my subtitle for the presentation, it was Laws, Principles and Charters, and I've missed charters, haven't I? Well, I think it would be wrong to forget the contribution made to the profession and the advancement of Engineering Council registration by David Charters. David is a past international president of the institution and was one of the key figures in the development of the then Engineering Council division, which became the Registrants Group Membership Committee. He was also chair of FSH 24, the Technical Committee for Fire Safety Engineering. And whilst there are lots of intellectual notions of competence from David that I could share with you, I think I'd just like to conclude with one of the more inspirational that he introduced me to. David often included relevant quotations in his lectures and his presentations, and I've already told you that I like a good quotation. This is how the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers answered the question, what is engineering, back in 1946. Engineering is the art of modelling materials we do not wholly understand into shapes we cannot precisely analyse so as to withstand forces we cannot properly assess in such a way that the public at large has no reason to suspect the extent of our ignorance. A jovial quote. Hopefully we're moving on from that situation a bit. But I'll leave you with that, and I think now is the opportunity to answer some questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. That was really good and really, really interesting and wide-ranging. So there have been a few questions coming through while you were speaking. There were quite a lot of interest in Margaret Law's papers, so somebody very kindly did provide a website address for the availability of those from Arup. So hopefully everyone has seen that.
Fantastic.
The other thing, of course, is that yes, we will be sharing the slides afterwards, and of course the webinar itself should be available as on demand as well for those who are keen to see it. So to watch it again or to share it. So that's that. We don't have a great deal of time, but let's see where we get to. There is an idea that there are so many schemes for fire engineers, and is there any possibility of them all being brought together? I mean, there's a few questions about fire engineering, really. That idea that there's quite a range of schemes, and also that people don't seem to want to pay money for fire engineers. I don't know if you could make any comment on that, but certainly whether IFE, BAFE, whether they likely to come together when looking at competence. Is that the plan?
Well, we are certainly coming together when we're looking at competence schemes for fire risk assessment professionals. Yeah, I appreciate there are several national registers available for demonstrating competence in fire risk assessment provision. They've been brought together by the Fire Sector Federation, which is the sort of overarching organisation of fire bodies and interested parties. So on the Fire Sector Federation website, there is a sort of a compilation, an overarching register that brings all the fire risk assessor registers together, and there is a commonality in the approach to the registration processes. But clearly there are different schemes because there are different professional bodies operating in with different specialisms. But clearly there's a if you drew a Venn diagram, there'll be a lot of overlap. So I appreciate that. Also, you mentioned, Claire, about a reluctance to engage fire engineers on projects. Well, yes, I think that was been alluded to in some of those articles I was talking about in the pre-Grenfell kind of environment. And we are certainly hoping that that reluctance is a thing of the past. It certainly should be, and the gateway process that will take building projects from planning through design, construction and occupation, the gateways are an opportunity for the building safety regulator to make sure that the appropriate skills and appropriate people are involved relevant to the projects that are passing through that system. So hopefully bringing fire engineers in at the end of a project because there's a problem that they want them to magic away, or there inappropriate use of, or dare I say it, value engineering. Hopefully that will be a thing of the past. IFE is also working very closely with Royal Institute of British Architects, who are developing a fire safety overlay to their plan of work, which sets out to the design profession when fire safety or fire engineering input is required within a project. So yes, I think by working closely with allied professional bodies in the construction sector, we are breaking down those barriers and hopefully ensuring that the right skills are involved at the right time in projects. And we do recognise that fire safety is something that is carried out by a wide range of professionals. and it would be wrong of us to say, and all those professionals have to belong to the Institution of Fire Engineers. That's just not right. We understand that architects have an important role in fire safety. Building surveyors have an important role in fire safety. What's important is that we recognise, communicate and understand their contributions and make sure that these pieces of the jigsaw fit together so that at the end of the day we have a picture that we can all see.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. I think on a slightly related matter, there is a question about the amount of guidance that IFE provides. Are you able to provide guidance or a template for helping people to create a robust CV that can be sent to clients, but also a list of standards and codes of practice showing all that apply to competence related to well, the fire industry is the question, but I guess the fire engineering industry here.
Oh, that's an interesting one about guidance to create a CV. A CV for clients, was that, Claire, in the question?
Yes, that's right.
I mean,
yes.
I suppose that's something we could take away and think about. It's a useful suggestion. I'm also minded to just mention that we also work closely with obviously the Institution of Fire Engineers is a professional body for individuals, and the Fire Industry Association is the trade body for the profession, and we work closely with the FIA's Fire Engineering Council. And they are currently updating a scope of works for fire engineering, which sets out in a nice, easily understandable format how fire engineering or how fire safety should be used within the life cycle of a building. So that's an important document that can be referenced when talking to your clients. But guidance on CV, that's something I'll make a note of, and we'll give that some thought.
Okay. I think just thinking again about sort of membership and support around IFE. We've had there are a few attendees today who are here from overseas who were joining us from the Far East, and I assume from other areas too. Do you have international membership at IFE, and is there any likelihood that the registration of fire engineers could be expanded, internationally?
Yeah, well, it's fantastic that today's. I appreciate that a lot of content from today's webinar is pretty UK focused and actually England focused. So it's great that we've got international people, an international audience joining us today. That's great. And the institution is a global organisation, and we have branches across the world, and membership is certainly very international. In terms of Engineering Council registration, which is that last thing that we were talking about, at the moment, the contextualised registration scheme it's going to be launched as a UK, or actually an England scheme, because it's going to support the building safety regulator and the new building safety regulations. But the concepts that are embedded within it have so much transferable applicability around the world. And I mean, I've been talking with colleagues in Australia who are going through exactly the same kind of, they're thinking about the same questions, they're thinking about the same way of demonstrable competence and enhancing it for particular sectors of the construction industry. And I'm sure there's great potential for these concepts to be rolled out internationally in several jurisdictions around the world. So I would say watch this space in terms of registration for the contextualised registration, but Engineering Council registration is recognised in many jurisdictions around the world, and the IFE has dozens of registrants who are not based in the UK.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we've run out of time now this afternoon. There's lots of a huge flurry of questions that have just come in the last minute or two, and we will endeavour to get to those. And certainly they'll all be passed over to Peter to have a look at in case, because there are some observations, not all questions, there are some observations and comments as well about the presentation, which I think will be quite interesting for you. So I'll move to close then now, and thank you all very much for attending. Thank you very much, Peter, for your time this afternoon and for a really interesting presentation. There's quite a bit of activity that BSI, webinars and so on, that BSI is running around building safety and fire safety. There's a list up there on your screens, and with a more information button as well. And there is a dedicated competence website as well, which if you just look up BSI competence, you can get access to the BSI Flex, which Peter talked about, and the 3 PAS documents as well. They're all free to download if they are of interest to you. So thank you once again, Peter. Thank you all for attending, and that's it from us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.